Dante Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So in the year of boxing where we desperately need some really mega fights, David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo, they are in a position to almost save the year. I mean, it's still going to be a horrible year if that's the only good fight we get, but at least we can look forward to this fight, which would be one of the biggest fights of the year, if not the biggest. Because this fight would be like Mayweather versus Canelo'S, Sugar Ray Leonard versus Roberto Duran. This is De La Hoya Mosley. This is Trinidad De La Hoya. This is Chavez Meldrick Taylor. And because Jermall Charlo has been calling David Benavidez a baby that's too young, you could also say this is Trinidad Fernando Vargas, because that is exactly what Trinidad kept saying about Fernando Vargas. Now let me make this clear so there's no confusion. I'm not saying that these fighters are on those fighters' level yet, but what I'm saying to you guys is this is the type of competitive fight this is, meaning it is a 50-50 fight. You don't know who's going to win. This is a type of fight where you may see one of them get hurt bad for the first time. You may see one of these guys get knocked out for the first time. There's so many possibilities going into a fight like this. So we've heard both Jermall and David Benavidez talking about making the fight. Now, more recently, Jermall Charlo, he's been saying some things that are a little distracting, saying some things like he wants David to get vaccinated. And then he even said, I'm not fighting nobody under 25. But before he said that, he said, you know, David, have your people call me. Or he says, David, call me up. Let's make this fight happen, etc., etc. So I'm going to keep telling you guys this over and over again. Just like I believed Ryan Garcia at the beginning, I believe Teofimo Lopez at the beginning when he said he wanted to fight Devin Haney. I believe Jermall Charlo really wants to fight, at least until I see him fight someone other than David Benavidez in September. If he doesn't sign a contract, because I know that David already has a fight in March. Jermall Charlo wants to fight in May. So it would seem that Jermall Charlo will want to move up to 168, test the waters at a higher weight class, and then fight David Benavidez in September. If Jermall Charlo signs a contract to fight someone else other than David Benavidez, then it's going to be an official duck. Just like it's an official duck when it comes to Teofimo not fighting Devin, because we know he's fighting Kambosos next. And when it comes to Ryan Garcia, who promised the world, it was written in stone that he was going to fight Gervonta Tank Davis next. That's why it's premature to say that Charlo is ducking as of now. I truly believe the fight is going to happen. There's a couple reasons why I believe this fight is going to happen. For one, Charlo has been mentioning Benavidez's name for over a year. He's always talked about moving up to 168 and fighting David Benavidez. He's never mentioned any other names but David Benavidez's name. Another reason why I believe Jermall is going to take this fight, because I always tell you, pressure busts pipes. If Jermall Charlo were to even try to duck David Benavidez, unlike a Teofimo Lopez or Ryan Garcia, Jermall Charlo, he doesn't have his hope insurance. He is going to receive the biggest backlash probably in the history of boxing. All of those old media members that are protecting Ryan Garcia, Canelo, and Teofimo, they're going to do the complete opposite when it comes to Jermall Charlo. They're going to go after him, because this is what they always do. This is what old media always does when they suspect that the black fighter is avoiding someone, especially if it's someone on the hope list. They did this with Adonis Stevenson when it came to Kovalev. For those of you guys who don't know, there was a time when Adonis and Kovalev were the two best light heavyweights in the world, and they went back and forth talking about facing each other. There was talks of both fighters turning down the fight at one point, but of course, only Adonis got blamed for it. And when this happened, when Adonis started to go his own way, I remember one time I was actually on a conference call. Adonis, he was fighting someone next. I forget the guy's name. It was the African guy. The African guy that won the Contender. So anyway, we're doing this phone conference with Adonis and his opponent. And it's so funny because the first couple of guys that called in, reporters, the first thing they asked Adonis about was the Kovalev fight. When are you going to fight Kovalev? Adonis, he kind of answered it a little bit. He talked about it, maybe the first two questions. After that, he said, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I want to focus on my next opponent. So right after he said that, everybody else that called in, they continued to still bring up Sergey Kovalev's name. It got so bad to where his opponent, Adonis's opponent, the trainer, he said, man, this is offensive. Man, everybody, we might as well not even be here if everybody is going to keep asking about Sergey Kovalev. The trainer was heated about this, right? He said, I might as well just get off the line. So they completely wore Adonis out, basically implying nobody cares about this guy that you're fighting. When are you going to give us the fight that we want to see? Is what the media was telling Adonis Stevenson. But when it comes to Teofimo Lopez, when it comes to Canelo, when it comes to Ryan Garcia, these same old media members, they're saying you can fight whoever you want. They don't even want to accidentally put pressure on Teofimo by mentioning Devin Haney's name too much or Tank Davis's name too much. So by way of contrast, you've seen how bad it was for Adonis Stevenson. It's going to be worse when it comes to Jermall Charlo, if Jermall Charlo were even thinking about ducking David Benavidez, because social media is always evolving. There's no way Jermall Charlo will be able to turn down or avoid this David Benavidez fight. So with that being said, them fighting against each other is going to catapult the winner into pound for pound status. It's going to create a new superstar in the sport of boxing, and it's going to put an enormous amount of pressure on Canelo to take the fight. When you got the two most dangerous fighters in the division willing to risk it all to fight each other, that's going to force Canelo Alvarez to have to do the same thing. And honestly, that's going to be such a big win for the winner of that fight. Canelo is going to end up needing the winner of that fight just as bad as the winner is going to need him. So listen, this is what the WBC needs to do. Since the WBC was able to make Avni Yildirim the mandatory for Canelo Alvarez belt, even though Avni Yildirim was ranked number 2 behind David Benavidez, that means David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo should be a WBC Eliminator bout, which means Canelo Alvarez would be forced to fight his mandatory, which would be the winner of that fight. Or will Canelo Alvarez break his own record and become the first fighter in history to vacate his title 3 times? Well, I won't say the first fighter in history. Let's just say the first A-level fighter to vacate his belt 3 times. And every single time he vacated the belt, it was against a young, undefeated, hungry lion. You see, people get stripped of belts all the time, but it's for many different reasons. Usually it's because of an injury and they can't defend the belts, inactivity, or something like that. Failing a drug test, or even losing your belt on the scale by not making weight. And then you have the Canelo's of the world that only vacates when the opponent is too dangerous. So we'll see if Canelo Alvarez vacates his belt a 3rd time, because he's already made it clear the only thing he wants right now is to unify the belts, and possibly the weakest division in the sport, one of the weakest divisions. And when I say one of the weakest divisions, I'm talking about when it comes to the champions in that division. Because we know if Canelo Alvarez was in the welterweight division, if he was in the lightweight division, if he was in the junior lightweight division, or even the light heavyweight division, he would not be talking about unifying the belts. This is the reason why Canelo did not unify the belts when he was at 160. Why? Because Charlo and Demetrius Andrade were the champions. And the same thing can be said about 154. So anyway, this is what the president needs to do. But because the WBC is now ran by Canelo Alvarez, that probably won't happen. We'll see. But it already makes all the sense in the world because once again, David is already the #1 contender for the belt. So let's see how this all plays out. Since Jermall Charlo said he will return in summertime, which is either May or June, it'll be really interesting to see who his next opponent is going to be and will it be at 168. If it's not at 168, that's not a good sign. Let's see what happens. I want to close out with saying this. You know, David Benavidez, he did an interview with my man Aki, where he basically talked about, he was responding to Jermall Charlo talking about the vaccination and all of this, he's too young, etc., etc., etc. But David Benavidez was so sincere when he talked about how bad he wants this fight. His stock just went up when it comes to boxing fans. Because I was reading the comments, the interview that I uploaded on my channel with Aki, you could see all of these black fans saying, man, I really respect this man. Now I'm a big fan of David Benavidez. You see all of these black fans constantly praising David Benavidez, giving him all the props in the world, respecting him so much. Why? Only because he's pushing for this dangerous fight. Guys, by way of contrary, do you guys notice that when it comes to Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, Canelo Alvarez, and when you have Devin Haney calling out Teo, what do these fans that are not black, what do they say? What do? They start to trash Devin Haney for wanting to challenge himself. They start to trash Jermall Charlo for wanting to challenge himself, or Andrade, right? Do you guys know that Jermall Charlo didn't start to get disliked by non-black fans until he started to call out Canelo Alvarez? Same thing with Demetrius Andrade. Same thing with Andre Ward. When Andre Ward started to call out Gennady Golovkin, he started getting called out of his name ridiculously. They went from calling him SOG, which is his nickname, then they start calling him SOB and, you know, he's a bitch and he's this and he's that. Why don't you leave Golovkin alone, move up to light heavyweight? Why don't you fight Kovalev? You're ducking Kovalev. One of my associates that I knew, he was a cut man that worked with everyone, so he knew everyone in the business. He passed away, but he couldn't stand fighters on a coincidental list, really to no one's surprise. He couldn't stand Terrence Crawford, and he really couldn't stand Andre Ward. He even went so far as to tell me that the man that runs Nevada State Athletic Commission, I believe is Bob Bennett, he would tell me how he hates Andre Ward, right? The guy that runs the commission couldn't stand Andre Ward. Now let me revise what I said earlier. Andre Ward did receive hate once he became pound for pound the best fighter in the world, of course, right? But when he started to call out Gennady Golovkin, and before Golovkin, he called out Chavez. I remember this. When Chavez was still undefeated, first Andre Ward called out Chavez. And I remember the fans in my comment section, they were saying, why don't you fight Gennady Golovkin? Why don't you fight Golovkin, right? They were thinking that he was trying to basically cherry pick because he wanted to fight Chavez, knowing that on paper, Chavez is an easier fight than Gennady Golovkin. So they told him, why don't you try to pick on somebody like Golovkin? So shortly after that, Andre Ward heard Golovkin say, I'll fight anyone from 154 to 168 or 175? That's when Andre Ward started his campaign calling out Gennady Golovkin. Once Ward started to call out Golovkin, then they said, why don't you leave Golovkin alone, move up to 175 and fight Sergey Kovalev? And the rest is history because we already know what Ward did to Kovalev. So once again, the point is, when David Benavidez calls out the best, we, as black fans, we give him the credit he deserves because that's what we want. We want to see the best fight the best because we are real boxing fans. But when Devin Haney, for example, is calling out Teofimo Lopez and you're saying, oh, Devin is a bum, he ain't fought nobody, etc., you're saying everything negative. You know why? Because you are a race fan. People who do these things and say these things, these are race fans. They're not boxing fans. If you were a boxing fan, you would actually be praising Teofimo Lopez for even wanting to challenge himself. If you believe he has no chance of beating Teofimo, then you should be giving him the utmost respect that he wants to fight a dangerous opponent that you believe would beat him. For you guys to say, Devin Haney, he ain't fought nobody, that's even more of a reason for you guys to be praising him. You should be saying, man, Devin Haney, he hasn't fought anyone, and he wants to dive headfirst into the deep end and take on someone as dangerous as Teofimo? You should be giving him credit for that. Not talking about how he's a bum and he's this and he's that. You should be giving him credit for wanting to challenge himself, because that's what we real boxing fans do when we see David Benavidez willing to challenge himself, willing to put his undefeated record on the line. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Fellas, I've got some great news for you. If you've lost your hair or have a receding hairline, the time has come when you can finally get your hairline back through a process called scalp micropigmentation. So here's how it works. It's a hair tattoo that replicates the look of your hair follicles when you have fully shaved it down. So to get this hookup, make sure you follow and contact my man Scalp Carolinas on Instagram. All right, now check this out, guys. If you're looking to repair eczema scars, burns and bruises, dark spots and blemishes, then this right here is the perfect product for you guys. It's called Elo Diki Face and Body Oil. Athletes and top-ranking boxers, they're also using it after training to reduce swelling, inflammation, and to ease the pain. So get yours today. Go to elodiki.com, like them on Facebook, and follow them on Instagram.